Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to worship today. I'm Pastor Hans, and I'm just honored you're with us, whether you're watching online or you are watching at one of our partner churches. Today, we are launching a brand new worship series. You read it right. It's called Stop Going to Church. Why would we ever name a worship series Stop Going to Church? Well, I've been thinking over the last several weeks, think about how it is that we use this word, church. Think about it. There are all kinds of ways that we use that word. For example, maybe you had a late Saturday night, it's Sunday morning, you wake up, you roll over, and in that groggy, tired voice, you say to your spouse something like this, "Are we going to church?" Or how about this one? You are engaged to your beloved, and you're trying to decide where you're going to get married. And so at some point, maybe you say to your beloved something like this, "Should we get married in a church?" In both of these instances, what is church? Well, church is a building with that big long aisle where people get married. Church is that place you go on Sunday morning and that balding guy talks up front and you hear a little good music before getting brunch. How about this one? There are other ways that we use the word church. For example, it's Sunday morning. Dad's in the minivan, sitting out in the driveway. He's been waiting for about 15 minutes, and that's when he calls his wife, who's in the bathroom still getting ready, and says, "Where are you?" He says, "It's time for church." What is church? Well, church in that instance is this sort of event that happens on Sunday morning where we go for about an hour and hang out with people we know, and then we're out of there. Another way we use the word church is this. Maybe a friend is gung-ho about his church, and he turns to you one day and says this. He says, "You should join my church." What is a church in that instance? Well, it's sort of like a club. It's like the Kiwanis. It's sort of like the YMCA or a golf club. You got to become a member. Or maybe for you've been married and you have kids, and your parents have come to you and said something like this: "Now that you have kids of your own, you need to raise your kids in the church." Or maybe somebody goes through a tough time and you're talking to a friend about it, and one of you says to the other, "If only they went to church." In that instance, what is church? Well, church is sort of like this antidote for all the problems in the world. Why do I start with all of this? Well, here's the truth. The authors of the Bible, when they talked about what the first church was, I got to be honest with you. It was none of these things. It wasn't a building. It wasn't a club. It wasn't sort of meant to be an antidote to all the world's problems. It wasn't meant to be a 1 hour event you go to on Sunday morning. Actually, the word church comes from a Greek word. Let me geek out on you a little bit here. The Greek word is ekklesia. You say that, ekklesia. And it comes from two Greek words, the first being ek, which means out from, and the second word, kaleo, which means to call. In a sense, what the church was this. It was a group of people that are called out. Christians actually stole that word from the way it was used in ancient society. In that ancient society, people were the ekklesia. People were called out from their community to gather together on occasion to take a 40,000-foot view of their community and wrestle with issues that were going on. They were called out from the norm. Christians stole that term, the church, the ekklesia, because it was really fitting. The first Christians were Jewish people. They were called out from their former belief to a new way of believing. And then it was the Gentiles who had no belief whatsoever, or they believed in other gods. They were called out from the ordinary to a new way of living and being. You see, the church was always meant to be this group of people that were called out from the everyday ordinary to live lives that were different. There were people who said, you know what, the ways of this world, might makes right, the one with the most toys wins, That's not working for us. And so they were called out. They were the church. And here's the truth about them. They were different. They were different. And so during this series, we're going to be wondering, what is the church? Because here at Calvary, here's what I know for certain. We don't want to simply be a building. We don't simply want to be sort of this requirement that you check off the list each Sunday morning when you come through the door. We don't want to be some kind of fictional antidote to all of the life's problems. No, we want to be the people in our community who, when others look at us, they look at us and they say something like this: hey, there's something different about those people. There's something different about them. So over the next few weeks, here's what we're going to explore. What does it mean to be the church? And to get after that, we're going to talk a little bit about our mission statement here at Calvary, what we believe God created the church to be. And that statement goes like this: we lead all people to a lifelong faith in Jesus Christ. Would you say that with me? Here, let's say it again. We lead all people to a lifelong faith in Jesus Christ. And so over the next few weeks, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about what does it look like to lead. And then the second week, we're going to talk about what do we mean when we say all people. And then third, the next week, we're going to talk about what it looks like to have a lifelong faith through the phases of our life. And lastly, we're going to talk about what does it look like for us to take Jesus to places where Jesus is not. But today, I'm going to start with that first one in the little time I have left with you. And I'm going to start with a story. When I was in middle school, my family moved. We moved from Iowa up to North Dakota. We were in middle school. Anybody else move during middle school? I think those of us that moved during middle school, we know that is a rough time to move. In fact, if you want to start a support group, just give me a call, right? Because that's the kind of move that leaves scars on us forever. But I moved in middle school, and I'll be honest, it was a rough time to move. And as I went through my 8th grade year, it was the middle of the year, I sort of fit in. I tried to figure out who people were, and I got involved in some activities. But it was in 9th grade that something significant happened. In 9th grade, all of my new friends, so to speak, in this new town, all of them, they were going out for football. Now, I loved football. I was a rabid Vikings fan, but I had never, up until this point in my life, ever played organized football. But because all my buddies were, I said, yep, I'm going to go out for football. And let me tell you, it felt for the longest time like I was absolutely clueless. I will never forget showing up for 2-a-day practices in August, in the heat of August, and that coach having us run sprint after sprint after, it was all running at this school. And I remember at one point turning to my buddy and saying, hey, when do we quit running and actually play football? Do you know what his answer was? I think the coach just wants us all to vomit, right? I remember we were working out, needed some water. I went over to the water cooler, and in those days, you just had a cup and you dipped it in the open water cooler, and I looked in the water cooler, and it was brown. You couldn't see to the bottom of the cooler. I was new to town, remember? And here's what I didn't know. Everybody else knew this. That's just what happened to the water in the fall in this little town in nowhere, North Dakota. To make matters worse, the coach, I was the new kid, he couldn't remember my name to save his life. Do you know what he called me? He called me Alex. And do you know what? He yelled Alex all practice long because I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Well, here's the truth. I would eventually letter in football that year. But the entire year, I felt as though I was sort of an imposter. You know what I mean? I felt like I didn't necessarily belong. In fact, more than just not feeling like I didn't belong, here's what else I felt. I felt like I was kind of faking it. Isn't it interesting how junior high experiences stick with us into adulthood? Now, here's the deal. The reason I tell that story is I think that's a great analogy for all of us in life. Aren't there times in life where we feel like, I don't know if I belong? We feel as though we're sort of faking it. I mean, maybe for you, it's at work. You look at your coworkers. Oh, they have more education than I do. They've got more authority than I do. They've got more experience than I do. I don't belong. I'm just kind of faking it. Or maybe for you, it's with other families, other parents. You look at how other parents, other moms, they get their kids all put together before school, and you watch them drop their kids off for school. It looks like they just stepped out of a Gap Kids. Your kids are just lucky that they got clothes on because you are running like mad every morning. Their kids, they eat waffles with homemade whipped cream every morning. Your kids, they're lucky they get Pop-Tarts and juice boxes on the way to school. We compare ourselves to other parents. We go, I don't belong. I feel like I'm just kind of faking it sometimes. Our students, they feel this all the time. They look at their other classmates. They see what they're wearing. They see how they do in sports or academics or whatever it might be. And they wonder, do I belong? I don't know if I stack up. They feel as though they're faking it. You see, I think all of us, we feel this way from time to time. And there's a psychological term for this. It's called the Imposter Syndrome. Have you heard of this before? Where we feel like we don't necessarily belong, even though someone has said we belong. It feels like we're sort of faking it, even though we're on the team. Here's a great definition for the imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evidence to the contrary. Imposter syndrome, it does this to us. It sends these messages in our head that look like this. Imposter syndrome tells me I don't belong here. It says, I'm not as capable as all the people around me think I am. It tells us that my success, it's just due to dumb luck. I found this meme that I think is just priceless for those of us that experience this thing called imposter syndrome. Take a look at this, a good Darth Vader meme. How it feels when you have imposter syndrome. Good old Big Bird there. You see, here's the thing. I think all of us, from one time or another in our lives, we feel as though I don't belong. We feel as we're rubbing shoulders with some people, I'm just faking it. And here's what I think. It's not just in our relationships with those at work. It's not just as we compare ourselves to other people in the community, other families, other parents. Here's what I think. I think we do this as Christians as well. In fact, I think there's something that I would call imposter Christian syndrome. I think we as Christians, sometimes we go to church and we look at the other people sitting in the pews, sitting in the aisles, and we look at them and we go, I'm not one of them. I mean, they all seem to have their lives together. They all just appear as though they know what's going on when it comes to this business of faith. I'm sure they read their Bible, they do their devotions, they have their time with God, whatever that means. Me? I barely got out of bed this morning. In fact, I wouldn't be in church if my wife hadn't bribed me with caribou this morning. You see, we do that. And here's the problem with that, is it sort of stalls out our faith. We get stuck when we do this Christian imposter business. Because here's what happens. You might hear about a connect group. People gather together. And when you're invited to be a part of that, maybe you do something like this. In your head, you go, I can't do that. I'm not like them. I don't know enough stuff. I don't belong in a group like that. Or maybe someone invites you to be a part of a guest services team, to be a greeter or an usher, or to lead a small group of kids. And you say yes, but the entire time you feel like a fake. You see, when it comes to our Christian faith, I think sometimes we feel as though we're imposter Christians. And here's what happens. We get this little voice in our head, and you do this. You rule yourself out before God can work on your doubt, right? Those doubts you have about yourself. Or to put it another way, those voices in our head, we let it disqualify before God can modify our thinking. Or to put it another way, we let that voice discredit us before God can edit us. In Luke chapter 5, Simon Peter, he's been fishing all day, and this guy by the name of Jesus is in the boat with them. He uses part of the time to teach to a crowd that's on the shore, but Peter has been fishing all day, and he has been skunked. He hasn't caught a single thing. Here's what happens. When he had finished speaking, Jesus, he said to Simon, "Put out in deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered him, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." Now, I imagine Simon Peter, he's a professional fisherman. This is what the disciples did. Jesus is in the boat. You want to show him you're good at your trade, right? And I imagine he's a little bit embarrassed because he hasn't caught anything all day. And then Jesus, he offers some advice. You know what it's like when someone gives you advice you didn't ask for. I imagine he was feeling a little sheepish. But Jesus gives him this advice. And Peter, I love how Peter says this. He says, "But because you say so," right? He's looking at Jesus. "Well, I don't believe a word you're saying, Jesus. I don't believe we're going to have any better luck. But because you say so, we're going to go out deeper." Well, here's what happens. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. You see, Peter, I imagine he felt a little sheepish here. He felt like, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. But he also, in that moment, realized something about Jesus. He realized that this Jesus wasn't just a great teacher. He realized that this Jesus wasn't just some rabbi, that this Jesus was a son of God. And that's when I think Peter experienced what you and I, this imposter syndrome. It says, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord." And then he said this, read this with me, "I am too much of a sinner to be around you." You see, he felt like he was an imposter. He wasn't good enough. He didn't belong. I'm not one of your type of people. He felt like he was sort of faking it. And I love how Jesus responds. And this is why I tell this story. Jesus responds in this way. Then Jesus looked Simon Peter in the eye and said, "Do not be afraid, but from now on you will fish for people." He looked at Simon Peter and said, "You know what? I've got a job for you." He didn't sort of coddle Simon Peter. He didn't try and say, no, Peter, everything you've done so far, it's perfect. It's good enough for me. No, he gave Peter a job. And it says, so immediately they pulled their boats up to shore. They left everything and they followed him. You see, the problem with imposter syndrome is that imposter syndrome always has us stuck. It keeps us from doing the things, of living the life that God wants for people like you and me. In a sense, imposter syndrome is a distraction from action. It has us saying, I can't, I won't, there's absolutely no way. It's sort of like strapping 100-pound weights to both of your legs. It keeps us from moving forward. But here's what happens to Peter. Peter is freed to lead. He's freed to lead. And in the story of our faith, it's interesting. Jesus does this again and again. We have a God who looks at characters that normally we would disqualify and says, I'm going to use you to lead, to do something remarkable. I mean, think about it. Noah should have been disqualified. He was a drunk, but Noah was freed to lead. King David, think about it. He was a murderer. He was an adulterer, but David was freed to lead. Solomon was a womanizer, but God freed him to lead. Mary and Joseph, they were two nobody kids from this nowhere town of Nazareth. They were freed to lead. The disciples, crusty fishermen from nowhere Galilee, right? They were freed to lead. Paul was a persecutor of Christians, but he was freed to lead. You see, friends, here's the thing about this God of ours. Our God qualifies the disqualified. People like you and me who disqualify ourselves, God says, you're more than qualified. In a great passage, Paul writes these words: "We demolish arguments and every pretension that set itself up against the knowledge of God." What is he saying there? You and I, we have these voices that rattle around in our head that say, no, I can't lead. I can't do that. I'm not one of them. I don't belong here. I'm just faking it. Paul says, We demolish those sort of arguments that go up against what God sees in people like you and me. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Friends, on this first week of this series, stop going to church. The question is this: what does it mean to be the church? Here's what it means to be the church. We're this gathering of people who are called out from the everyday ordinary. People who are freed to lead.
Sinking sand, so stomp your feet and clap your hands. Our feet are on the ground. Come on Christ the solid rock I stand. On the ground it's sinking sand, so stomp your feet and clap your hands. Our feet are on the ground. When I feel the whole world about to break, I will cling to your unchanging grace. Let the waters come and the earth give way. I'll be dancing in the rain. Grace.
Thank you so much for joining us for worship today. Please join us in praying the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for being with us today, especially if this is your first time with us. If this is your first time with us, we'd love for you to consider taking a next step. Head on out to our website, calvaryalec.org. The easiest next step you can take is to hit that button that says sign up for emails. Each week we'll send you a little note about all the ways that you can join us on the journey of faith. If you consider Calvary your church home, this last week you would have received some information in the mail about what we are calling the Be the Church Giving Appeal. Every year at this time of the year, we are making plans for all God is going to do through us in the coming year. We're inviting you, if you consider Calvary your church home, to be the church, to join us in the huge impact that God is going to make in our community and beyond through your financial generosity. To find out more, to make your commitment, head on out to our website, calvaryalec.org, and we'd be honored if you'd hit that button that says Be the Church. Join us in being the church. As we close our time together today, thank you so much for being with us. We close today, as we always do, with our offering. Your generosity allows us to impact the lives, for example, of hundreds of students in our community every week. It allows us to pack bags of food for families in need. We support a food shelf that's actually in our high school right here in Douglas County. We're grateful for your generosity. You can make your offering today in one of the ways found on the screen. The first is simply to head out to that website, calvaryalec.org, hit the button that says Give. You can sign up for a one-time or reoccurring gift. You can use that app on your phone, Venmo. Go ahead and make your gift that way, or you can write a check, drop it in the mail to the address on the screen. If you're just not sure how to make your gift, give us a call. We'd love to talk with you. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a good one.